Hello everyone, welcome back once again. So the Daily Mail relentless fixation on Meghan's reported Australian Girls Weekend says far more about the stage of royal media than it does about Meghan herself. So what should be a simple story about a private citizen organizing or attending a high-end retreat has somehow been inflated into a so-called scandal, complete with emotional loaded language, selective outrage, and a familiar pattern of narrative manipulation. At the center of this latest media storm is the claim that a member of the Sussex squad, described dramatically as lieutenant, was handpicked despite allegedly making inappropriate remark about Kate during her illness. So the framing is deliberate. It invites the reader to associate Meghan directly with controversy, even when the connection appears indirect at best. This is not new. It's a continuation of a long-running pattern where Meghan's actions, association, and even perceived association are placed under a microscope, then magnified into something far more sinister than reality supports. So, what stands out most is the glaring imbalance in how outrage is distributed. The same outlets that now claim more rally high ground over online venom has spent here publishing headline commentary and insinuation that many will argue contribute to a far more sustained and damaging environment directed at Meghan. Yet, there's a little introspection, no meaningful acknowledgement of that role. Instead, the focus shifts towards losing. Instead the focus shifts outward and often toward losing connected individuals in an effort to construct a narrative of wrongdoing around Meghan herself. So the conversation around the so-called Sassy Squad is particularly revealing. So online fan community exists for nearly every public figure, and they are rarely monolithic. To single out one voice, elevate it, then attach it to Meghan's as though it reflects a personal value is a stretch that would not be applied so readily to that constant. It raises an uncomfortable question. Why is this standard applied so aggressively here and so selective? Equal striking is how certain controversies are framed depending on who they involve. When it comes to Meghan, even neutral or factual observation can be recast as cruelty. So the mention of widely discussed and latest restricted image become in some narrative an act of insensitivity rather than a reflection of public scrutiny. Yet, when scrutiny flows in opposite direction toward Meghan, it's often normalized, excused, or ignored entirely. And this is where the issue moves beyond individual and into the realm of institutional dynamic. The role of pilots communication, media relationship, and long-standing narrative cannot overlooked because there is a perception widely held amongst Meghan supporters that certain stories are not just reported by strategically amplified. Whether one agrees with that view or not, the consistency of the pattern is difficult to ignore. Meghan, meanwhile, appeared to be doing something remarkably simple, living her life, stepping back from royal duty. She has focused on building projects, raising her family, and maintaining a degree of independence that once was denied. Yeah. The idea that a private trip, whether for leisure, networking, or business, should become the subject international scrutiny feels disproportionate. It suggests that for some segment of media, Meghan's very autonomy remains a point of discomfort. So there's also an undercurrent of expectation, that Meghan should be accountable for the behavior of anyone who expresses support for her, no matter how distant the connection. This is a standard relay imposed on others. Public figures are not typically held responsible for every standard made by their supporters, especially in decentralized online space. Yet, in Meghan's case, the bar is consistently raised and the benefit of the doubt is rarely extended. At the same time, the broader conversation around public sympathy and media protection become impossible to ignore. Certain figures are afforded a level of shielding that discourages scrutiny, while others are exposed to relentless examination. Because this imbalance does not serve the public, it distorts the narrative and limits meaningful discussion. None of this diminishes the seriousness of illness or the need for compassion. But compassion should not be selectively applied nor should it be weaponized as part of the broader narrative strategy. When empathy becomes conditional, it loses its authenticity and risks being perceived as performative rather than genuine. So, what makes this moment particularly telling is the growing fatigue among readers. More people are becoming to recognize the pattern, to question the framing, and to push back against narratives that feel manufactured. The reaction is no longer limited to a small group of supporters, it is becoming part of wider conversation about media accountability and fairness. As for Meghan, the continued focus on her every move may ultimately have the opposite effect of what is intended. Instead of diminishing her, it reinforces her relevance. Instead of isolating her, it draws more attention to the disparities in how stories are told. And instead of undermining her choices, it highlights the very independence that critics often seem unable to accept. If Meghan does travel to Australia, the reception she receives will speak to follow. Public responses have a way of cutting through media narratives, offering more immediate and authentic reflection of sentiment, whether warm or critical. It will be a real away that headlines often are not. So in the end, these so-called scandals feel like a revelation and more like a repetition. The same theme, the same framing, the same attempt to turn ordinary moments into extraordinary controversy, but with each cycle, the effectiveness appear to diminish. Audiences are paying close attention, asking harder questions, and demanding a more balanced perspective. Perhaps that is the real story here. Not the trip, not the guest list, but the shift relationship between media narrative and public perception. Meghan, once defined by the story told about her, is increasingly defined by life she's building beyond them. And that, more than any airline, may be what truly unsettles the system that continue to watch her so closely. Thank you guys for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share for more updates.